So last week we started the Gospel of Luke, and we looked at the structure of Luke and Acts, and if you recall, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension serve as this keystone, occurring both at the end of Luke and again at the beginning of Acts. It's the center of the story that holds everything together and is the turning point that is able to bear the weight of the world. Now, in the tradition that I grew up in, of these three, of the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension, the resurrection was emphasized the most. The crucifixion was emphasized on Good Friday, Friday services, and obviously Jesus dying for our sins. We talked about a lot in the tradition that I grew up in. But the resurrection was this joyous celebration that Jesus overcame death. But the ascension in the tradition I grew up in was kind of an afterthought. I don't think we didn't talk about it too much in my circles that I grew up in. And I remember being in a church history class learning about the symbols of faith and how in Catholic and Episcopal churches you'll often see Jesus on the cross is very central, right? Emphasizing the sacrifice that Jesus made. In Protestant churches, you will see empty crosses, right? A cross with nobody on it, as a reminder that Jesus is alive and that of the resurrection, Jesus has overcome death. And in Orthodox churches, in the dome that covers the church are the paintings of Jesus at the right hand of God, Jesus on his throne. And that's the ascension. And it's so fascinating. I don't say this to say that any one tradition is correct or whatever. It's just to reflect on the symbols that we use and the ways that they shape the way we understand God and we view the world around us. What emphasis, what accent, if you will, is placed in our lives. And so Luke really emphasizes the ascension. At the end of Luke and again at the beginning of Acts, as I said. And in Acts 2, Peter's preaching to the crowds, and he describes the ascension this way. He says, God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of it. Exalted to the right hand of God, he has received from the Father the promised Holy Spirit and poured out what you now see and hear. Now remember, Peter at this moment was explaining what was happening, and people were able to speak in languages that were not their own, and people were able to understand languages that were not their own. And he's saying it's because Jesus is King. The right hand of God is indicating that he is the King of heaven and earth. Now, if you recall, all the way back on our very first Sunday together, we explored the creation of the world and how on the seventh day that serves as the coronation of the King. The celebration and honoring of God, Creator King, who appoints all authorities and the one to whom all authorities must answer. God created an entire ecosystem in which all of creation is bound together and works together under the care and direction of the King for life and flourishing. And in the beginning, all of creation was good and full of life. Violence was non-existent. And life abounded. And in Luke and Acts, we witness Jesus ascending to his rightful place as King of all creation. The Gospel of Luke is the story of King Jesus. And Acts is the story of the spread of the good news of his kingdom, where violence is no more and life abounds. So as we spend time today in the first chapter of Luke, I wanted to keep this in mind, that Jesus is King, and he is reigning over heaven and earth. All right, in Luke 1, we have two songs that we listened to read for us. Leah read the first one, which was Mary's song, and Marlon read Zechariah's song. In the Gospel of Luke, stories of men and women are paired 27 times, which is fascinating. As you read through the Gospel of Luke, you'll read something from a female's perspective and something from a male's perspective. And that happens 27 times in the Gospel of Luke. It's a reminder that we were created together in the image of God, and that the good news of Jesus and his kingdom is for everyone. Now, often those who were religious leaders, as they would listen to the gospel and they would observe Jesus' life, it was often the people that they would least expect. It was women, the unclean, sinners, and Gentiles that are lifted up as people whom God favors and who demonstrate great faith. And here in this opening chapter, we have two families that come from very important Jewish families. So Zechariah and Elizabeth belong to the house of Aaron that serve as priests, mediators between God and God's people. And Mary's fiancé Joseph belongs to the house of David that historically served as rulers for God's people, and from whom the Messiah king or Savior, the one who would rescue, was promised to come and save God's people. There's some significant contrast between these two narratives in the first chapter of Luke. Now, Zechariah and Elizabeth, they live in the hill country of Judea, a place of honor at the heart of religious influence. And Mary lives in Galilee, the text tells us. Beyond even the despised land of Samaria, she lives in Galilee of the Gentiles, and we read that she's in a small town of no influence called Nazareth. Gabriel, the messenger of God, visits both Zechariah and Mary. Zechariah, who's an elder man of importance, Gabriel proclaims to him that his son that will be born of his wife will prepare the way and make the people ready to receive the Lord. And to Mary, this young woman of little importance, Gabriel proclaims that the son she will bear will be given the throne of his father David, and that his kingdom will never end. And on the one hand, Zechariah's question is one of disbelief. He says, how can I be sure of this? And as a result of his unbelief, he's made silent. I don't know how many parents wish that we could do this with our kids, right? Like, when they don't believe us or they don't do as we say, like, they're just the silence when we come. But he's silent, and he is silent for months. It's okay. Yes, yeah. God made him silent, yeah. As a result of his unbelief, he is made silent by God until John is born, right? And as a result of his unbelief. Now, for Mary, she asks the question as well. But her question isn't, is this going to happen? But she's just confused. She goes, how will this happen? Right? And as a result of her belief, she's actually given an explanation. Now, those who first heard this story would have immediately noticed the contrast between Zechariah and Mary. And they would have been shocked that Mary, this young girl of low position, was honored for her faith, and that Zechariah, this person of high position, was shamed for his lack of faith. But there's also things in common between the two stories. Zechariah and Elizabeth are described as righteous and blameless. They followed the commands of the law that put them in right relationship with God, their community, and all creation. And we learn through Mary's song that she also was devout and had a good grasp of the law and the prophets. You can tell from what she proclaims that she understands what is happening. Zechariah was a servant of the Lord performing his priestly duties as a mediator between God and God's people. And in her first documented step of faith, Mary proclaimed herself to also be a servant of the Lord, accepting that through her, God and humankind will be one again. Now, Elizabeth, as an elder woman with no children, experienced public shame. While her husband was in a position of honor in the community, there's this shadow that hung over them, right? This suspicion from the community, these murmurings, these rumors. What's happening? Why aren't they having any children? They must have done something wrong. God must not favor them, right? So this is happening all around them for years. But Luke reveals that Elizabeth and Zechariah were righteous in spite of God. Now, similarly, Gabriel declares that Mary is favored by God. But soon, she will have a shadow of suspicion hanging over her. Likely, when people find out that she is pregnant before she's married, a lot of rumors and suspicion start going around. So when Mary receives the news that her relative Elizabeth is also pregnant, she immediately rushed from Nazareth to Judea. This is not a short distance. And again, this is like last week. When good news is given, people rush. They rush out and they go to be with others who will understand. And Mary knew that Elizabeth would understand. She would understand what she was about to go through. She would know what to do. She would know what was happening. And sure enough, as she arrived, now at this point, Elizabeth is 6 months into her pregnancy. And the minute she sees Mary, the moment she sees her, the baby within Elizabeth leaps for joy, the scripture says. And in a loud voice, Elizabeth blesses Mary and blesses the child she's carrying. Now remember, they didn't have phones or email. Mary had not in advance told Elizabeth that she was pregnant, and she definitely wasn't showing at this point. But Elizabeth proclaimed, "But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? Blessed is she who believes that the Lord would fulfill his promises to her." She is blessed. And after receiving that blessing, Mary breaks out into song. And later, when John is born and Zechariah can finally speak, after saying, yes, his name is John, what Elizabeth said is right, his name is John, he also breaks out in song. Both of their songs that we heard today are songs of praise, exalting the Most High for what he has done. Mary's song begins personal, with gratitude for her role in the story, and moves into the communal blessings of God that will come through her song, the Messiah King. Zechariah's song begins with the communal blessing of God, and then moves to a personal blessing of his Son, who would prepare the way for the Messiah King. Both identify the saving work of God through the Messiah. Both reference the position of humans as servants of God. Not kings ourselves, but servants of the true King. Both remember God's covenant with Abraham. They both describe it as a covenant of mercy. That the covenant that God made with Abraham was that he would make Abraham into a great nation. That his descendants would outnumber the stars in the sky, and that they would be a blessing to all nations because Abraham obeyed God. Now, the covenant is referred to as a covenant of mercy because God also made it clear to Abraham that whether or not the descendants of Abraham obeyed God, God would always be faithful. Even if they failed, which they were sure to do, God would not fail. His love would not fail. Zechariah's song emphasizes the forgiveness of sins as a result of God's mercy. A couple of times he speaks of God's forgiveness of sins. Mary's song emphasizes the lifting up of the lowly and the bringing down of the powerful. Jesus, the Messiah King, will come in mercy to forgive sins, remove oppressors from power, and lift up the oppressed. The mercy and forgiveness of sins are for both the oppressor and the oppressed. I'm going to say that again. Jesus is going to come. He has come, and he will come again in mercy. He forgives sin. He removes oppressors from power. And he lifts up those who are oppressed. This is really important. Mercy and forgiveness are for both the oppressed, and the oppressor. Now, it's mercy for the oppressed and the hungry that they will be lifted up and have the good that was withheld from them. It's a mercy for the oppressor that power is removed from them. It's a mercy to them that power is removed. Forgiveness does not guarantee restoration to power. According to the passage, the one who withheld good will go away. There's consequences, right? There's consequences. When we harm others, when people in power harm others, there's consequences. We may not be restored back to an original position, but forgiveness from God is always available. His mercy is never ending. Now, both songs end with a picture of the fulfillment of God's promise of redemption. Mary's song ends like this. He has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, just as he promised our ancestors. Scholar Kenneth Bailey identifies the significance of Gentiles not being condemned in Mary's song. If you look at the song again, which is in that first passage that was read today, there's a couple of pairs right before this closing that are opposite to one another. The first pair says that God has brought down the rulers, but has lifted up the humble. Right? So we see a reversal, right? He's brought down the rulers, but he's lifted up the humble. The next pair says that he filled the hungry with good things, but sent the rich away empty. Right? So again, we see this flipping of things, right? So we would expect that in the next one, the same would happen. That here he has helped his servant Israel, and the listener would expect to hear the opposite, that God would oppose the Gentiles. That's not what Mary says. Instead, Mary moves into the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham and his descendants, that Abraham's descendants would be blessed, and all nations would be blessed through them. This happens later. We'll get there in Luke 4 when Jesus proclaims from Isaiah that he is here, he is the Messiah, and his kingdom is present. And he reads from the book of Isaiah, and he leaves out the part about the Gentiles being punished. And people are so upset by him leaving that part out that they try to kill him. It's so disturbing to them. So we see a foretaste of this in Mary's song. There's this acknowledgement that there's something bigger happening here. It's not just the fulfillment of God to his people. It is that for sure. But it's also the fulfillment of the entirety of the promise of God, that he would redeem all people in all creation. So Zechariah's song ends with this picture of redemption. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, speaking of his son John. For you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace. Now, in summary, all nations will be blessed through the Messiah in Jesus, by the forgiveness of sins. Light will break into our darkness so that our feet will remain on the path of peace. Notice it says, light, the rising sun will come to us from heaven to shine on those living in darkness. The light breaks into the darkness, right? And the darkness scatters. The light breaks into the darkness so that our feet can remain on the path of peace. The path where violence is no more, in life is filled with all of this. So as we reflect on these two songs, these two people, Zechariah and Mary, their differences, commonalities, the ways in which the story is being told in a way that nobody expected, there's a few things for us to consider. First, where in my life do I, like Zechariah, carry importance and influence? All of us, even if it's in our own home, only in our own home, or with our own family, or our own friends, or our workplace, have some places where we carry importance and influence. Am I so comfortable in these spaces that I mostly operate based on habit? Things are pretty easy for me. Zechariah is just going through the motions. He's doing his thing as he's supposed to do, right? And in those spaces, as I'm operating kind of out of habit, do I also tend to operate within my own reason? Like, I understand this world so well. I know how everything works. But am I willing to believe that God can do something outside of my expectations? In those places that feel so comfortable and normal, everyday life to me. Am I expectant of God in those places? That He can do something beyond my expectations? Am I willing to humble myself? And, like Zechariah, am I willing to be humble as others are lifted up? Right? Sometimes as a parent, it's when your child says something and you realize, oh, I haven't been thinking about that. The Spirit of God is speaking to them. And maybe this is an unexpected place for me to hear from the Lord. But we hear from Him, right? Maybe we have influence in our workplace. And it's somebody of low position in our workplace that God is doing something that's going to change the entire culture of our workplace. Or where in my life do I, like Mary, experience invisibility? We're told the lineage of Elizabeth. We're told the lineage of Zechariah. We're told the lineage of Joseph. We are not told the lineage of Mary. Do I believe that in those places of invisibility that God sees me? Those places where I feel like nobody is seeing me. Do I believe that God sees me? Yes. Am I willing to believe that He desires to be glorified as He lifts me up to do the work He has prepared for me to do? Now, listen again. That step might be a little harder. It's one thing to say, yes, God sees me. Yes, God loves me. But when God visits me and says, I want you to do this thing, and it feels like that thing should be given to somebody else. The person with influence, the person with the power to actually do that thing. Like, why God are you asking me to do this, right? Are we going to be like Mary and say, yes, I am a servant of the Lord, and I will step into whatever it is that you have, because it's in my being lifted up that you are holy. Do I, like Elizabeth and Mary, live under a shadow of position and knowledge? Do I need to be reminded of how God sees me? That I am made righteous through Jesus and favored as His servant. When the doubts, the whispers of others, the accusations of the enemy come at me, am I able to remember how God sees me? As made right and in right relationship because of His forgiveness. Or maybe it's the opposite. Does my community see me as righteous and favored, but privately I live under a shadow of sin? Here's some things for us to think about as we consider this chapter. Wherever we are today, here's what we can be sure of. Jesus is King. He does not rule with violence or coercion. Rather, his power comes through mercy, forgiveness, and love. He sees the heart of every person, those with power and influence, and those who are pushed out of place. He knows the pain of the oppressed and the oppressors. Friends, people are oppressors because they've been hurt in their own lives. That is so often the case. It does not excuse behavior of harming others, but God knows that deep pain that's at the root of the oppression. He is mighty to save and will rescue us from our own sins and from the people and societal structures that hold us down. We're going to enter into a time of silence to listen to what the Spirit might be saying to us this afternoon. As we do, let us hear again the closing words of Zechariah's song. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, for you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path